Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. Our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We bring you weekly topics and thought-provoking guests to get you to stop, reflect, and think about what it means to be a leader in a modern world. Our aim is to help you become the leader you wish you always had, as we learn together and lead together. Please enjoy the show. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. We're greatly honoured today to be joined by Susan Shirley. Susan is the Principal Leadership Advisor with Global View Leadership, and she's based in New Delhi, India. Her focus is on cross-cultural leadership, and she works with multicultural teams and international leaders to help them to bridge cultural differences and also the physical distance that comes along with working in a multinational environment. It's an absolute great pleasure to have Susan with us today, and I'm very excited to see where this conversation goes. Susan, please welcome to the show. Please introduce yourself to our audience and tell us what led you to be with us today.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here today. And I think probably the most important reason that I got here today is I have worked most of the last 25 to 30 years outside of my own home country. And although the first half of that I spent doing a lot of project management type of work, I realized that I was often called on to be sort of a cultural translator because I had been in this particular country a long time. And when newcomers would come, they would ask me to help them sort of navigate the cross-cultural communication piece of their work. And I realized after some years that that's really what I like doing. I didn't really like doing project management so much. What I liked about it was teaching other people to do it, and especially focusing on that intercultural communications piece. So in doing that, I pivoted into training and coaching and focusing on cross-cultural leadership. And that's how I met you and ended up here today.
Fantastic, Susan. And your profile on LinkedIn did get our attention. And we're always on this show looking for people that are going to challenge our thinking on a particular topic. And we do live in a very international and global world with many multinational companies that have workforces that are spread across the world. So we wanted to talk to you. I've had some experience with this myself working with multinational companies, but you've specialized in this. And we really wanted to see where this conversation takes us and what our leaders out there can learn about that. So I'd like to dig a little bit deeper there about that background. So you said 25 years from your home country. So tell us more about before you left.
Where is my home country?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm from the United States. And upon finishing an MBA program, I went to Egypt. I had focused in international business, and in my mind, I was thinking Paris, and my partner at the time was an anthropologist, so Egypt was kind of a compromise. Little did I know I would love it there. I thought I would stay a year. I ended up staying 10. And really, it's the longest I lived anywhere in my life. I guess I moved around a bit as a child. And so inside the United States, but still, this was sort of a stable home for me. It's a second home country, if you will. And after 10 years, I returned to the States for a few years and then began my husband is with the State Department. So we move every 3 years for his work. But I had already started doing consulting work and working from home and doing training and other consulting projects. So the pivot to coaching and working remotely was zero. I was already doing that. And since he moved. I've lived in Venezuela and El Salvador, Egypt again, Turkey, Austria, and now India. And during that time, I've worked in all kinds of places. I get the best of all worlds. I get to live somewhere interesting, and then I get to travel for my own work. So I think I've been as far east as Cambodia and as far south as Mozambique. Maybe that's the farthest south I've been. And I worked a little bit in Europe and, living in Vienna as well. So,
wow. That's an amazing
always
experience.
Learning something new about people.
Yeah, that's an amazing experience, Susan. And I can imagine all of the lessons that you've learned along the way. I've just got to ask a few questions out of curiosity, first of all, and be careful. You don't want to offend anyone here, of course. But do you have a favorite of all of those countries that you've lived in?
Oh, well, I would have to say Egypt is my favorite just because, I was there at such a formative time in my life. I was, from age 25 to 35. So, still growing up, really. I learned so much about things. And also, I like it if you can be somewhere where people are quick with a joke. And, that's, as an Egyptian would say, we have light blood. Damo Hafif. He has a good sense of humor, a light personality.
Yeah, good.
So,
all right.
So I did really enjoy it there.
Very good. I've got to ask this as well. So 25 years away from the US, where do you call home, Susan Shirley?
I guess wherever my immediate family is. I don't really have a property that I own or an apartment that's available when I go back or anything like that. And my parents are movers too, so they're not living in the house I grew up in. And that's, in fact, this is, I think, the third house they've lived in since the one I grew up in. So, I guess we have a generational people all over the place.
So as a world citizen and well-traveled person, the question I've got in mind now, and this is Susan Shirley, the individual. We'll talk about businesses in a moment. Which of those countries were most challenging for you?
I think Venezuela was very challenging. I think it's challenging for the people who are from there as well. I don't think it was only challenging to me, but it's a little bit difficult to move around there. I didn't know the language when I got there. I think I must be the only American that didn't have a little bit of Spanish.
Right.
And so, that was a barrier for me. And there were just a lot of sort of divisions, and it's a little bit difficult to live there just because of the outer surroundings, the political situation, the economy, and all of that.
So it was challenging from a societal point of view, or infrastructure point of view, like difficult, or was it challenging to your values? What was most challenging to you?
I think, a little bit, there were some structural things where you would go to buy groceries and they would just be out of stuff for a while. Like there'd just be no cheese or no meat or no something. And you'd have to wait and keep checking until it came again, because there are economic challenges just for everyone in the country. And some things were, when you move around as an expat, you live in probably a very protected, well-off neighborhood. And that was the case. When you move around as someone, as part of a State Department family, you're not really part of the elite that surround you in your neighborhood. So, it's a little bit, you always feel a little bit underdressed or under something. And, and some of it, I had a newborn also, which is a thing that affects your experience in general.
Yeah. I can imagine. Tell me, what did you learn about yourself through that experience?
I think I learned something about myself and also about my family. I think that was the first time I'd been abroad where we all went together as a family, because my daughter was actually born in Egypt, so she didn't know something different. So we all moved to a new country together. And I think that's when I first realized how much more important your immediate family is for social interaction than they might be in your home country. In your home country, the kids go to school, they hang out with their friends, and you have something you're doing at work, or you belong to clubs, or you know other people. And as an expat, when you first arrive, you have only your family. And, it's really important to get along and support each other as you each navigate your own way forward. And then it challenges you to choose something that you enjoy, that gets you out meeting people. And, I'm not a big, sit around in big groups of women and drink coffee. There are always these coffee mornings, but I end up always choosing a book club or some kind of something where I learn a skill. I prefer something like that. But I didn't know that until our first move like that abroad, where I had to think of a way to have friends or people, even acquaintances.
Yeah. So. I like that concept of having that outlet, but the fact that you chose a personal growth one there, very interesting. And it also brings us a little bit full circle to what you said when I asked you about where your home is. I can see in you just how important your family has become, and you've all had that shared experience along the way. So I can see why you say that home is wherever your family is, which many people would answer that. But for you, I can see that through that experience, it's probably doubly so. Yeah, interesting. All right, let's lift it up now to the organisational level. So we're here to talk about leadership and how leaders can approach cultural differences and diversity amongst multinational and multicultural teams. Tell me your experiences in terms of companies and when they embrace cultural differences versus when they shun cultural differences. What's your experiences about what a multinational can do to really embrace a multicultural environment?
I think the most important thing that a company can do is to consider all staff equally, like they're all equal resources. And that's really hard to do. I've never seen someone shun that as a concept, but it's very hard to implement. We're kind of wired to trust people who are like us. So even when we think we are including people, we may not be giving equal weight to what everyone says. It's a common thing that you see that the person, if there's an expat who comes to lead a project or, be a manager or just an employee someplace, they may choose as their most frequent mentor or colleague someone who's more fluent in their own language. And that person might not be the best one to give them the information they need or to show them the ropes, but they seem like they are because it's easier, to get information from them. So I think I always say that I think that cultural differences should never be what keeps someone from success, and I think that companies, to make sure that doesn't happen, should be making sure that all of their field offices get the same kind of organizational culture training and onboarding that their home office staff get. And so that they know how they're supposed to be and what the norms are instead of having to figure it out sort of remotely. And then the other thing they can do is make sure that whoever the managers currently are really listening for the information that they can get and the skills that people have, instead of maybe the presentation of the person or how good their language ability is. So
yeah,
there's
a lot to unpack there, Susan, and I'd like to start with something really interesting that you said along the way. You said that we're wired to trust people or look for people that kind of look like us. Tell me more about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's that it goes to just implicit bias or unconscious bias, and I would like to think everyone has good intentions. No one thinks that they're biased against people, but you have to constantly check yourself, because we do things we don't know we're doing. And we have a lot of impulses. Like we have, we talk a lot about the fight or flight sort of reflexes that bypass our, the thinking part of our brain and go straight to just the reaction part. And we have those, and we also have some things, our brain processes are what we take in through our senses very much faster than we can think about everything that comes in. And so our brain does this sorting for us.
Yeah.
And it does it without us knowing. So that if you see a big red truck and it's making a lot of noise, that's a fire truck. You don't have to think about it every time. Although now some of them aren't red, but you get the idea. And so, our brain creates these shortcuts. So, one of the shortcuts that are sort of in there is, oh, that person's like me. That person went to my university, or that person came from my state, or that person talks like me or worked at my company. Whatever affiliation that person has, your brain's sort of putting them in a category of like me, which makes them safer somehow. It's a shortcut that our brains will do if we let them.
Yeah, thanks for raising this, Susan. I think it's something for us all to think about. And it does make me think of our interview with Dr. Alessandra Wall. And she was challenging our thinking in that interview for sure. And she just openly said, everyone is biased. And where it comes from, listening to Susan, and there's been some quite heavy scientific studies of this, and I'll try to dig them out and put them in the show notes, that show that from being a baby, you're able to do this as a survival instinct for you to be able to recognize who your mother and father is from the time that you're born, right? So it is actually a biological thing that you start recognizing people that are similar to you for that family connection and for survival, and it comes back from science and biology of who you are. So if we acknowledge that bias exists, and even the purest of people, including me that absolutely detests any type of discrimination, to realize that unconscious bias sits in all of us, but it's then what you do with it that makes the difference. When you notice it, when you pull yourself up, and it's your response to that bias that makes the whole difference in the world. Not the bias itself, your response to that bias is what makes an impact on people's lives. Is that a fair summary, Susan?
I think so. And it's being on the lookout for your own bias first, and then what you do when you find it, because you'll find it.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. Okay, well, thank you. The next part that you brought up, and you've mentioned this word multiple times now, and I've been this, so I've experienced what we're about to talk about, is expats. You use the words that companies should treat everyone the same regardless of their cultural heritage and where they come from. But I'm going to challenge that and say, I agree with you, by the way, but I'm going to challenge you and say that that doesn't happen in so many companies, that expats somehow get treated differently. They get treated, in some cases, almost like royalty, welcomed, and here is the expat, et cetera, et cetera. But then underneath, there's also a little bit of a challenge element to it. So tell me your experiences about that expat experience. Expats, do you agree they're not, in most companies, treated just the same like the locals?
Oh, you're absolutely correct. They are not. And often, depending on the structure of the company, they're sent to manage people in a place where they've never been. And if they're good at what they do, they'll realize they need those people to help them and to show them the ropes, and they will do their best to create an office culture there, which brings in whatever cultural elements of the organization, because that's what you add as the expat. You add whatever headquarters is saying is your organization's culture. And the systems and processes from headquarters, that's your advantage. But everything else, the local staff is going to know more than you. They know the language, they know the layout, they know the clients, they know the business and how it might be different locally. And so depending on where you are, you may be treated very, very well and called sir or madam, or, and people might carry your stuff for you. Who knows? But as long as you remember is your piece and your expertise, and remember that everything else is coming from the local staff, I think you do well. You can do well to manage the situation.
To summarize that,
it's difficult for expats though too, because they don't really have anyone to ask to help them, because they don't want to look stupid in front of their staff, and they don't want to look stupid for headquarters. So, they don't really have a cohort of people they can just comfortably consult with.
It's an interesting balance that you bring up there, Susan. So what I'm hearing is that there are positive impacts that can come from this approach of people coming from head office, let's use that as the term, and coming in and bringing some of the culture, some of the company's vision, the direction, and shaping, if you like. But the ones that are successful are the ones that listen to the locals, that engage the locals, and then maximize, like bring what they're good at, bring their authentic self, bring what they're good at, but then give an environment where the locals who are good at what they do, that allows them to succeed together. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. That's exactly.
Any examples that you can share with us where that hasn't been the case, where it's gone very badly?
I'm not going to give too many details, but there was a manager of an office that had about 20 people. And this manager would have meetings and say things, we're going to do this. And nobody would disagree. And this manager thought that meant they were good to go. Everybody was on board, and things were going to start happening. And it was just not the case. But the culture she was operating in, people learn their whole lives not to disagree with authority figures. And so they never would say that's not going to work, or we shouldn't do that, or even though they were all thinking it. And so, she always had a false impression of where things were going. Well, I told everybody. And it took a long time to figure out ways to get people to be open with her. I mean, she had to invite them, like, please tell me what's wrong with this plan, because that's like an open invitation to say things are wrong with the plan. Yeah. And so she started asking that question, and things went much better. But to assume that no response in a meeting means agreement is a very common thing, actually.
There's countless examples in Asia, and specifically, where business people have walked away thinking, like Western business people walked away from a meeting thinking, oh, that was an amazing success. And wonderful, and they haven't truly understood what just happened because they haven't read the cultural aspects of the meeting. It might have been a meeting over dinner. It could have been a business deal or something like that. And in some cultures, it's very rude to directly say no, whereas maybe in Western cultures we're kind of used to it, and it's commonplace that if you disagree with someone, you raise your hand, I don't agree with this boss, or no, we don't have a deal. It's commonplace to be quite clear. And in some cultures, that's not the case. And you can end up with meetings where two parties depart with a completely different understanding of what just happened. Yeah. All right. Very, very good. So tell me, we're on an interesting ground here then. How do we bring that together? So how do we take those different cultures? So the examples that we're talking about here, how do we make the best of both worlds? Instead of trying to clash cultures, how do we make the best of both worlds?
I think that we need to be very cognizant of the fact that no national culture is a monolith. So if you go to a bank or if you go to a government office, the culture and the feel and the way people act is going to be very different than an IT company startup. And so your local office, or if you're the expat or whatever, a team member there, you will develop your own culture, either on purpose or by accident. You will develop your own thing. And so to make that intentional, where you are keeping the things that headquarters wants about this organization, and while at the same time incorporating things that work for the staff and that will work for the people you interact with. Because even if you trained your staff to be direct and say no when they mean it, they can't go out and act like that with other people because you're still in that place. And so you have to, together intentionally, design your own culture. What are we going to be like at work? And what are we going to be like outside, where we know we might have to be a little different when we meet clients or when we meet, government officials or somebody else. So just designing that on purpose, where you get the best of both worlds. That's how you do it.
Yeah, really good. I like this. So designing it, and it sounds like an activity that you're doing together. It's not something you do in isolation. Design together a team culture across that multicultural team that does take the best of both worlds and bring it together. That's really powerful. I like this a lot, Susan. Thank you for sharing that. So, Susan, something I've always wondered about is about this desire to not treat anyone differently, right? And we spoke about that earlier in the conversation. But we also want to celebrate their cultural heritage. We want them to turn up as their authentic self every day. Any tips on how we balance those two things? Don't treat them any differently, but do celebrate who they are and their cultural heritage.
I think when we spoke about not treating people differently, we were speaking about opportunities. And I do believe that all of the same opportunities should be available to everyone. They shouldn't be available for one group and not another. But when we talk to people and we treat them one way or another, people don't want to be all treated exactly the same. Even, within the same demographic group, you'll have introverts and extroverts. The introvert doesn't want to be celebrated in front of a lot of people. They'd rather receive positive feedback another more quiet way. So when you think about that in terms of culture, of course, people can bring their authentic selves to work. There may be a couple of areas where if you're giving a speech to management, that might have to be done a certain way, but not in a way that hides who you are. You just may have to structure it a certain way to to meet whatever process you're used to doing. But people can be who they want and bring their diverse backgrounds. After all, your clients will be diverse, and whoever you're working with in the outside world will be diverse. So the more your internal composition reflects your external stakeholders, the better off you are as a company or any organization.
Yeah, really good, Susan. I want to play that back, and please, I'm testing my understanding. So if I get it wrong, please be very free to say so. So what I'm hearing from you there is about treating people the way that they want to be treated, right? So obviously the platinum rule that we often talk about, not treating people the way you want to be treated, treating them the way they want to be treated. We're talking about equity and equality of opportunity. And then we're talking about bringing in a diverse workforce, encouraging inclusion, but not necessarily assimilation. Is that a fair summary?
That is an excellent summary. I love the two opposing words, inclusion versus assimilation. I think assimilation doesn't work. People can only pretend, and it makes it very stressful for them. And it's probably not even a goal that you want to. I can't think of a situation where that would be the best goal. Maybe synchronized swimming.
Yeah. I can think of times in my career where people have espoused that and said, "Oh, we need assimilation, harmony, and all this kind of stuff." Assimilation and harmony are not the two the same things, and assimilation and inclusion are different things, right? So, yeah, really good. And I think that's a powerful message for us all to think about. All right, tell me more about authentic self then. We've brought that up a number of times. What does authentic self mean to Susan Shirley?
Well, it's kind of funny because I would have said, if you had asked me about this years ago, that it just means being able to be yourself at all times. But I think if we truly examine ourselves, we find we don't know what our authentic self is right away without thinking about it a bit. We think we're doing this now, so this is the way we are, but really you're doing that because that happens to be your job for now, and maybe that isn't what you love, and you learn it over time. So I think being your authentic self is being able to express what you're thinking and feeling at the time, being able to just admit when you make mistakes. It takes a little bit of bravery and a little bit of introspection, and it doesn't really end. You have to keep doing that. Keep looking inward and finding your authentic self. It's a balancing act when you are when you live as an expat, because you can't always just do whatever you want. I mean, I come from New York City. You can pretty much wear what you want, say what you want, go where you want. It doesn't matter. No one cares. But in most other places, people care more than that. From just maybe you just need to dress a little better, or maybe you need to watch how you say certain things or address people. And there's always a balancing act between doing what's considered polite and normal where you are, and then where it bumps up against something that's of value for you. And, I think as an expat, you kind of explore those boundaries more than other people, because, it does come into, do I want to say hello to the man that brought the tea? No one else is going to speak to this man, but I feel like I should say hello and thank you. Yeah. So, it's not like a huge thing, but you have to find ways to do it that make you feel good about it. Your values are. Don't embarrassing the poor tea man who doesn't want to be called out in front of everyone.
That's a really interesting example, and it's the kind of thing that you wouldn't think twice about, and then realize later, oh, okay, I didn't mean to make him uncomfortable. That was not my intention. In fact, my intention was the opposite, right? Yeah, really interesting. Are there any examples that you can think of, Susan, where you think that one culture could really learn from another culture? And I'm going to give just an example, but I don't want to feed anything to you. I want you to really reflect on your learnings. I don't know a lot about Egypt, certainly nowhere near what you would know, and I'd love to know more. But one thing I do know is the value they put on relationships, that relationships become before business, for example. Do you think that is something that other cultures could look at the Egyptian culture and go, well, maybe they're onto something there? Now, don't have to use that example, but any cross-cultural learnings that we can embrace?
Yeah, I think there are a lot like that, and I was actually working on the relationship aspect of cultural differences the other day, because there are a certain number of cultures that are much more, if you want to say, transaction based or work. They're going to focus on the objective work product or the situation, and not worry so much about the relationships. And I would say if you come from a place where the relationships aren't as valued, it certainly would be a great thing for you to learn, because even in those cultures where the relationship doesn't come first, and trust is built over performance or merit or some other thing, it doesn't hurt, right? It does, you might not be able to influence a deal or something based on your relationship, but people are generally happier when those relationships are good. And why would you not build that up? You could make it go the other way where, the relationship was valued above performance or qualifications or something else, and then the project doesn't go well. So I don't know if you could value one over the other, but I would say you should try to have a little bit of both.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, good one. All right, I want to bring back to another example now and see where this one takes us. So we spoke before a lot about the expat situation, so where someone is arriving in another culture and physically working there. In the structure of many multinational companies today, there is multinational work that occurs, right? So the idea of an offshore development centre that may be in India where you are, or in Vietnam, or might be a BPO office in the Philippines, etc. So there might be a head office in London, another office in the US, a development centre. Let's use India as the example. And you end up with these multinational, multicultural teams that are spread across the globe. And you spoke in what you help organisations with about the physical distance now, as well as the cultural difference. Any tips that you can provide our leaders listening to the podcast about how to manage a multicultural, multinational team that are all working on the same project?
I think, well, there'd be a couple of things. One would be to consider the same things you would consider in person, in terms of how, especially working online, you want to give people time to respond to what you said. One, just connectivity. You don't know how things are working everywhere. But some cultures take longer to think about and reply. So to make sure you speak a little slower, leave more spaces in meetings and so forth. And also to make sure the meetings aren't always convenient for headquarters at the expense of everyone else. To share the inconvenience around a little bit. And it's always a good idea to learn just a little bit about the cultures that are going to be involved in your team or in your project or your call, even if it's just a meeting. I'm trying to think of a common thing that comes up in meetings is the way people present information. So if I'm trying to convince you of something, I'm going to give you, depending on where you're from. If you're from Germany, say, you're going to tell me how you thought of the idea, what research you did, all the events leading up to me telling you this now. And being from the US, I'm just going to tell you, this works. It's great. It worked in this place. It worked in that place. I go to the end right away. And so, so that's an important difference to know if I'm speaking to a German audience, for example, or if a German is speaking to some other audience. It's important to know how the people you're speaking with want to receive information. And it's interesting because there are individual differences as well. And the only way I've found around the whole thing is if you have a chance to ask people, what do you prefer? Do that, because otherwise you really can't know for sure the best way.
So I'm hearing a few things there, Susan. So first of all, know your audience. That's a really powerful one. That applies regardless of where you're in the world, but now it becomes more important to understand your audience's desires. And it comes back to treating people the way they want to be treated again. And we often get the question, but how will I know? And the simple answer is ask. People will be willing to tell you. If you ask them, how do you like this or what do you prefer, they will generally have an opinion, right? So, yeah, really good, Susan. So I've really thoroughly enjoyed today's interview. I'm going to bring us now to our rapid round. And thank you so much for all of your wisdom and insight so far today. The rapid round is a series of questions we ask most of our podcast guests to round out the show. So the first one, what's the one thing that you know now, Susan Shirley, that you wish you knew when you were 20?
I think it's that you have to always keep learning about yourself. You're never a finished product. And I know that sounds silly, but I would have thought so if you asked me when I was 20. I would have said, this is who I am and this is what I'm going to do. And, and I would have been sure of myself in the answer. And what I know now is that changes over time. And if you haven't really deeply thought about it, you might be giving a shallow answer. So
that really came through when you spoke about authentic self before, that all of us are on a journey of discovery of ourselves. People talk about, you don't really change, but you do. Your perception of yourself changes, how you see yourself in the world. It does change the more that you reflect and think about things. So, yeah, really good. I like that a lot, Susan. What's your favourite book?
Well, really and truly, it's Green Eggs and Ham. That's my favorite book.
All right.
But because, you should always try everything before you form an opinion about it. That's the whole point of the book. And that's true everywhere. But to give you maybe a little more grown-up answer, I like, in terms of general books, I like books that connect things together. So the book Salt, that talks about like how salt was important throughout the world and changed all these relationships between nations. Similar, Guns, Germs, and Steel is another one. But in terms of leadership, the books I rely on most are Culture Map, which is very interesting for people working in between cultures. That's probably my favorite work-related book.
Okay. So. All right. Fantastic. And what's your favorite quote?
I think it's better to trust. I can't remember the exact. It's better to trust the person who's frequently in error than the one who's never in doubt. And again, it's people who are so sure of themselves. You always need to be asking if you're doing the right thing. That quote is from a journalist called Eric Severide.
Okay, all right. I'll look it up and I'll make sure I put it in the show notes as well. Sorry, you were saying he was.
He was, he was a journalist. He was on TV for a while, but he was like, back in the days of journalism where, deep research and,
right. Yeah. All right. Very good. Oh, well, thank you so much, Susan. Now one more question for you. I'm sure there's people that are listening to this program right now. They could be leaders that are in positions where they're managing multicultural teams. They could be expats that are about to go on their expat assignment, or they're on assignment and they're not really sure. If people want to know more about the things that you help organisations and people with at Global View Leadership, how do they find you?
Well, they can find me using the webpage globalviewleadership.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. My name is very common, so you can look for globalviewleadership.com, and I am the only employee. Find me there. But you can look for me by name, but there are several people with my name.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Well, thank you so much again, Susan. We really appreciate your time today, sharing your wisdom and your insights, and giving me some license to follow and ask some pretty inquisitive questions about you and your experiences and what led you to your views and the wisdom that you shared with us today. So thank you so much. I've learned so much from you, and I know that our audience would have as well.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Project podcast at mickspears.com. I'm your host, Mick Spears. Sound design and editing by Faris Sadek. Social media by Gerald Calabo. And special thanks to our operations manager, Say Spears. We appreciate you, and we appreciate your time today. You can catch the video podcast and our series of shorter videos by subscribing to the Leadership Project YouTube channel. And you can join the conversation at our Facebook community group. We look forward to bringing you another great interview next week as we learn together and lead together. In the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.